Sure, right.
In the same way that the caveman couldn't have seen people living in, air-conditioned and temperature-controlled boxes.
Right. Wouldn't they have loved that?
I mean, you don't, they made a fire. You don't think they tried to control the temperature of their own surroundings too? Why would they make a fire?
No, I think they did. I'm saying that they would have loved modern technology, right? Bring a caveman in here and they would have been like, oh my gosh, this is
yes, technology is scaled to a point beyond, what they would have, their chain of logic could have imagined.
Yeah.
In a sense. Maybe not, but that's kind of the analogy. I always thought that was a neat analogy.
Hold on. I want to get a sense of something with you guys, because Romney has brought up this point before. I don't personally subscribe much merit to the idea, because I think some of the science behind it is still a little shaky. But I would like to ask you guys. I'll start with Morph Gamer, and then James will talk to you next. What do you think your IQ is? And then I'm going to ask Rami he judged me once, and I would ask that he just refrain from giving away anything at the moment. I'm just curious, what would you rate yourself as, Morph Gamer? And then James, and then Rami, I would like to get your take on what you think their IQ levels are. And then I'll get to my point from there. Go ahead.
Okay, so I took an IQ test. I may have taken it more than once, I'm not sure, but I scored 138, I want to say. And this was, like I said, this was 2 years ago. So this one I'd already been smoking every day for years. And I'd still scored above 130. And it was 135 or 138. So if you said, if we said, me sober for my whole life, may could have been a little bit over 140 maybe.
Yeah.
Around 140 to 145 maybe, right, if I'd never done any substances. But like I said, I feel like it's just, I've always felt like it's been high enough that didn't really deflect from it.
Yeah, at a certain point, you're so far above, you can afford to lose a few points.
And, they say that people that are high IQ are more likely to have, be depressed. So it's you know what I mean? I traded off.
Hold on. Normies made up the word depressed. It's actually just realism, and there's a problem with breeders that they are too optimistic. It's not that depression exists. It's that they created this idea that they're the normal ones when they're actually too optimistic. Depression is just being...
Maybe I would reword it like this. Being high IQ can make you enough of a cynic to give you a sad or disposition. So I guess you could say, I traded a small portion of my IQ to feel better most of the time.
Yes.
AKA cope.
It's
not enough to matter. It's not enough to really matter. Enough that it's worth it for me.
Of course.
In my opinion.
Well, I was going to say, one of the things that, Aaron Clary likes to talk about the curse of the high IQ. I have not read that book.
Me either.
But one of the things it seems to me, and I've talked to Rami a lot about this, and I still want to get back to his assessment of you two, and I want to talk to James still as well. One of his assessments or one of my assessments of high IQ is that people who have a high IQ, generally one of their traits is having a greater pattern recognition capability than a human being, and because of that, there are killer patterns, and so sometimes people fall into those killer patterns. And for most people, the black pill or the void, some people can avoid it. Some people see that pattern and see how that plays out, and it goes directly to the center of the void, right? The center of black pill, which at a certain point, Rip Renegade number 1, right? Really smart guy. He saw how this played out. Basically, he saw the human condition, and he said, no, not really interested in playing that game, right? Now, the unfortunate part is being human is partially about being irrational, right? Like, you're a human being. It's like, accept that you have some part of your brains that you can't fully control, right? Now, you can do more. It's like, if monks have anything to say about it, right? Like, you can do a great deal as far as like taming the inner beast, so to speak, right? The ape. But it's always going to be there, and whether or not you're fighting it or working with it is kind of the choice, right? It may never be peace until we learn to move on from our biological, like, shackles, so to speak.
Right. I don't think that's the thing. And I don't think there's shackles either.
Well, I mean, I said so to speak. I mean, I was waxing a little poetic there.
That's doomsday. That's not poetry. That's doomsday.
He's not saying we could become indestructible, but that we could sustain ourselves in a certain health ad infinitum, right? Well, as long as we don't get shot or stabbed to death.
Well, we're getting to the point where we can alter our own DNA, which will give us new possibilities and modes of existence. Maybe we'll have new senses in the future, right? You want to see infrared? We'll make you see infrared, right? You know, that sort of thing. Or, you know, we have Neuralink, right? Who's to say that we don't come up with some like mechanical or electronic like mode of existence for the human condition?
And that goes back to what I said about the caveman analogy, that's just such a leap, because technology is exponential. It's just such a leap. It's a leap that we kind of like don't even really have a frame of reference for.
No, hold on. You say that. Hold on. You say that, but we're working in that direction right now. Like, that's actively being worked on. So to say that we have zero frame of reference is not actually true anymore.
Okay.
So the sourcing of these frames of reference has changed. So it's like we've gone from like listening to old people in a 150 count village to, you know, random people we never dreamed we would have spoken of, you know, talking their jive on YouTube. And that coincides with the elements which cultivate the human soul. It's not going to be sweet things, it's going to be bitter things. Those bitter things have to be there to give our existence substance.
To appreciate the sweet things?
They default, like the Buddhists say, the default of life is suffering.
See, I don't agree with that either. I just think there's both, honestly. I don't think, like, just because there's bad doesn't mean like it's all bad, though. Like, I just think there's both.
Well, we got off the tangent. Are we going to go back to the IQ thing? But also, when are we going to start with the questions?
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I mean, we don't have to go there. I mean, I have about 45 minutes of recording now. Like, we don't necessarily have to go through all of the questions or anything. I mean,
well, let's bring up some of the questions. Why not tie it in?
I like number 7.
Okay, well, let's start with.
I came up with it, but I also really like it.
Well, since Rami's recording, do you want to share with all 90-something people who will watch this what you think your IQ is, and then maybe we should get Rami's opinion on this?
Sure. I mean, like, I've had opportunities in which I could have given my IQ test, but for me, I feel like putting a certain number on it kind of diminishes the subjective understanding of one's faculties, which could
understood
be related to IQ.
So, understood, like, and enough said.
Yeah, I mean, there you go. If I gave myself, you know, an IQ of 105, for example, like, okay, I'm factoring conditions of how effective is my problem solving, what skills have been made evident to me on this journey so far. But
Certainly.
Yeah. I mean, to me, it's
IQ is situational, it seems to me, or like expertise or competence has a lot to do with more to do with the human condition than just purely IQ or like your ability to pattern recognize or solve complex equations or
At the same time, there's still an average range that's considered average for IQ, and then there's like for example, they consider like people who get a bachelor's degree to have an IQ of around 120, basically as an average.
Completely false. Like
nowadays, probably not as much because the structure to give out loans so freely from too much government intervention is around. But if you were going off true merit of their performance in school before, like if you were really fully evaluating them, I guess. I don't know, maybe because I guess there's economic factors too, like being able to afford it. But you can be smart enough but not really be able to afford it as well. So that's a bit tough.
Oh yeah, no, certainly. I mean, I imagine there's a lot of very, very smart people in a lot of very, very rough spots right now, right? Like they should be saving our planet, and instead they're trying to figure out where their next meal is coming from, right? And they've been brainwashed into thinking that they need something in life from someone.
Well, there's plenty of studies that show that if you're in a survival situation, it literally hurts your cognition. It can hurt your IQ by as much as 10 points.
If you're
constantly in a state of survival.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. If you're in survival mode all the time, your body reacts negatively, and your cognition, your cognition will.
And the stress, basically.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, like cortisol, we were kind of talking about that.
Because the stress quite literally raises the cortisol in your body.
Yeah.
Well, aside from the stresses of life, I do believe there is going to be this base reference of capacitance in regards to like what you're capable of, depending on like your genetic constitution. I mean, everyone's going to have some high attributes of mental prowess, and so we're going to have, but at the same time they will have a degree of physical prowess. That balance is going to depend on the constitution and what their forefathers had to persevere through their lineage up until this point.
Sure. Yeah, there's all sort of.
I don't want to let that point go.
Yeah, there's all sort of like hereditary things, like even diseases, right? So and pain, right? Like being in pain through no fault of your own in life, and being like constantly subjected to that kind of thing, I imagine is something that would lower IQ as well, right?
Right.
You just can't concentrate, right? So anyway, the point I was trying to make is it's a very relative thing, and it's a very like I consider IQ like pseudoscience. It's not really like a good test. It's just sort of a vague understanding of where a person might land in a certain set of like scenarios, right? Like under certain conditions, certain scenarios, they would probably perform this well, or
I've always thought of IQ because they say it has to do with the speed of things you can process with your brain, and like you said, also pattern recognition. I think it kind of has to do with like just how prone you are and how quick you can learn in new information, or make conclusions about information
that you processing speed.
Yeah, like your ability to you can discern things, or maybe come to some conclusion quicker, given the same information as compared to someone else.
Okay, and
like for example, being a homicide detective would obviously require being high IQ.
Well, it would also understanding like human psychology and a bunch of other things, right? And a drive and motivation, that sort of thing, right?
But I'm saying I feel like that's a good, to a degree, having to be able to being able to take details in quicker than other people and make conclusions or piece things together, quick process things, piece them bits of information together quicker, come to conclusions quicker, etc.